There are exactly 3 things you don't expect to see when stepping out of your shower at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday: your door flying off its hinges, a woman in a faux military vest screaming, "Citizens raid," and a man in cargo shorts pointing a walkie-talkie at your toothbrush like it's a weapon of mass destruction. And yet, there I stood, dripping wet, half a towel around my waist, watching as a group of retirement-age vigilantes kicked their way into my living room with all the tactical grace of a toddler's birthday party gone feral. They had no idea they'd just breached an FBI live-fire simulation site, and I had no idea my Tuesday was about to become national news. It all started with Karen. Every HOA has one, but ours was special. Karen wasn't just the president of the HOA, she was the self-appointed supreme commander of community peace enforcement. That's what she called it, anyway. In reality, it was a glorified neighborhood watch team equipped with fake badges, custom polos, and a homemade charter that read more like a fanfiction version of a military coup than a civic agreement. She called them the Community Response Patrol, and they responded to everything, from minor mailbox dents to, apparently, invisible cartels operating out of garden shed. A week earlier, she had paraded down the cul-de-sac on her electric scooter, handing out flyers titled "Security or Chaos. Take your pick." Most neighbors rolled their eyes. I, on the other hand, ignored her completely. I had bigger things to handle, like coordinating the upcoming joint agency drill that was set to take place on my property. You see, what Karen didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was that I'm the federal liaison for the FBI's local training division. I manage a property that hosts high-level tactical simulations, weapons drills, and hostage scenario training. The small warehouse-looking structure at the back of my lot wasn't a man cave. It was a federally funded operations site, and it was, by law, classified from the general public. Not that it would have mattered to Karen. In her mind, I was that suspicious guy with the dark SUVs and too many boxes. She never understood that the constant UPS deliveries were not drug shipments, but tactical gear deliveries for federal exercises. Her paranoia grew like mold. The final straw came when she spotted one of our instructors unloading duffel bags labeled breach kits. She decided we were part of a cartel, and that the HOA had no choice but to take action. Now, if Karen had even a modicum of sense, or legal training, she might have consulted someone before launching a full-blown raid. But no. She pulled her patrol together like they were casting for a community theater version of SWAT. There was Dale, the retired pharmacist who took airsoft too seriously. There was Cheryl, who brought a clipboard and a taser she'd never tested. And of course, Karen, who wore a reflective vest labeled Commander, in glittery stickers and carried a bullhorn like it was the sword of justice. They waited for me to leave. That Tuesday morning, I stepped outside for 5 minutes to grab a breakfast sandwich from the gas station. When I returned, I noticed something odd. My front door was gone. Not open. Not ajar. Gone. Splinters trailed into the foyer like breadcrumbs, and from inside, I heard someone shout, "Clear the couch area." I walked in calmly, because I knew something they didn't. The entire building was under live surveillance. Hidden cameras, motion detectors, silent trip alarms. And the moment they broke the perimeter, 3 separate alerts had been dispatched. One to me, one to my federal team, and one directly to the FBI's regional field office. Inside, the patrol had taken up positions behind my furniture. They were yelling commands at each other using radio codes they clearly got from old movies. One guy yelled, "Tango in the kitchen," while pointing at my coffee maker. Another held a wooden broom like a rifle. Karen was mid-shriek when I stepped in, still holding my sandwich bag and keys. "What in God's name?" I started, but she cut me off with, "You're under community arrest. Get on the ground." I blinked. Not out of fear, but because I was still trying to register how surreal this was. Before I could say another word, the back door exploded open. Not literally, but with the kind of force that only trained agents can bring. 3 tactical officers stormed in, weapons drawn but not aimed, barking orders in a tone that immediately froze the room. Karen dropped her bullhorn. Dale screamed and dove behind a chair. Cheryl raised her clipboard like it might deflect bullet. Then came the silence. The kind that stretches time. The team scanned the room, eyes moving from face to face before one agent, Daniels, lowered his weapon slightly and said to me, "Sir, you good?" I nodded. "They broke in while I was out for breakfast." Daniels turned to the patrol. "This is a federal training site. You just committed a serious federal offense. Remain still and await detainment." Karen's eyes widened. "Federal? What do you mean federal? This is a residential zone." "He's running a paramilitary outfit." I stepped forward, finally speaking with authority. "No, Karen. I'm running a federal operation with full legal clearance. You, on the other hand, just led an unauthorized entry into a live-fire simulation site. That's felony trespassing, obstruction of justice, and possibly domestic terrorism, depending on how the report's written." Karen's face drained of all color. Dale's walkie-talkie let out a weak crackle before he turned it off and slowly raised his hands. Cheryl fainted against my kitchen island. The agents rounded them up calmly, professionally. The patrol wasn't handcuffed, yet, but they were escorted outside for questioning. One agent paused to look at the shattered door and muttered, "That's coming out of somebody's pension." Back outside, neighbors had started to gather, phones out, whispers flying. Karen was trying to compose herself, brushing off dirt and shouting about her constitutional rights. Daniels looked at her like she was a cartoon character and said flatly, "Ma'am, this isn't the internet. This is federal ground. You broke the law. Badly." As she was escorted into a waiting vehicle for processing, she screamed over her shoulder, "You haven't heard the last of Commander Karen." I shook my head, finally taking a bite of my sandwich. "Oh, I think we have." And just like that, what started as a paranoid HOA stunt turned into a federal incident with enough legal fallout to crater the entire neighborhood's HOA. But that was only the beginning. Because Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. "You said." Karen woke up in the back seat of a government SUV with her glitter-covered commander vest crumpled beside her and an agent politely asking if she needed water. To her credit, she didn't scream, at least, not immediately. She blinked around, confused, then narrowed her eyes and muttered something about deep state entrapment. The agent just gave a tired sigh, leaned back, and said, "Ma'am, you walked into a federal facility with a taser and a clipboard. That's not entrapment. That's a felony in khakis." Back at my property, the FBI containment team was wrapping up. They'd taken statements, cleared the perimeter, and resecured the surveillance feed. The door, still splintered in 3 parts, had become the centerpiece of the neighborhood's latest gossip storm. People strolled by in robes pretending to walk dogs, angling for a better look. One kid even offered to help rebuild the door in exchange for one of the cool FBI hats. I said no, but I appreciated the hustle. Inside, I sat down with Daniels, the lead on-site agent and my main point of contact. We reviewed the surveillance footage. Painful, ridiculous, and strangely captivating. It showed Karen giving a full-blown motivational speech on my front lawn before the breach. She waved her bullhorn around like a general commanding troops, quoting random lines from action movies. "We strike swift and hard," she'd said, pointing toward my property like she was leading a cavalry charge instead of 3 untrained retirees and a confused neighborhood cat who had wandered into formation. Daniel shook his head, laughing. "I've seen some bad entries in my day, but that one? That was like a flash mob trying to rob a laser tag arena." I smiled, but I was already thinking ahead. Karen's crew hadn't just trespassed. They had triggered high-level alerts. This property wasn't just some random warehouse in suburbia. It was a designated federal training ground with signed contracts, risk assessments, and restricted access zones. The moment her patrol crossed the threshold, they had tripped a silent alert that instantly pinged 3 agencies. If I hadn't arrived when I did, backup might have rolled in with armored vehicles and live rounds. Karen was lucky she only got escorted. But luck has a habit of running out. Later that day, Karen was brought to the local federal office for initial processing. Not an arrest, just a detainment while the situation was assessed. She demanded to speak to the head of Homeland Security, then tried to present a stack of HOA complaints as evidence of probable cause. The agents there, seasoned professionals with nerves forged in actual combat, treated her with polite disinterest. She accused one of being in on it, pointing to a tattoo and muttering something about cults. Meanwhile, her fellow patrol members were interviewed one by one. Cheryl claimed she thought they were just there to look around. Dale confessed he thought it was a drill and was excited to finally test out the breach maneuvers he learned from YouTube. But the real twist came from Bob, the quiet one who hadn't said a word during the raid. Turns out Bob wasn't just retired. He was a former ATF field agent who joined the neighborhood patrol out of boredom and a need for something to do. And Bob? Bob flipped. According to his statement, Karen had been planning this for weeks. She held secret meetings, passed out copies of HOA bylaws rewritten with militarized language, and even practiced tactical hand signals in her backyard. She had everyone convinced that my property was a nest of criminal activity, and that the HOA had the authority to perform citizen interventions if local law enforcement failed. Bob, sensing things were spiraling, joined only to monitor the situation, and when the door got kicked in, he knew exactly who to call. Bob's call, placed seconds after the breach, was what accelerated the federal response. Not my alert, not the perimeter tripwires, not even the surveillance feed. It was Bob, on a secured line, telling the Bureau, "You've got a group of HOA lunatics actively breaking into a classified facility. I strongly suggest you treat it as a threat." Without him, Karen's patrol might have had a few more minutes to cause damage, or worse, stumble into one of the sealed training rooms, some of which had live munitions staged for drills. Karen, of course, denied everything. When confronted with Bob's testimony, she called him a double agent and claimed he was planted in the patrol to sabotage her peacekeeping force. She still hadn't wrapped her head around the gravity of the situation. In her mind, she was a patriot, one who had simply overstepped. But in reality, she was neck-deep in federal violations. She had illegally entered a classified site, endangered herself and others, and disrupted an active operation. And worst of all, she was completely unrepentant. The next day, a formal statement was released by the FBI confirming the breach, clarifying the legality of the site, and thanking the unnamed citizen, Bob, who had acted quickly to prevent escalation. The agency didn't name Karen or the patrol, but everyone in the neighborhood knew. You couldn't walk 2 feet without hearing whispers. By noon, someone had updated the HOA group chat with a new poll. Should we disband the Community Response Patrol? The vote was unanimous, except for one lone no, which everyone assumed came from Karen's alt account, Commander Peacekeeper 77. Things escalated quickly. The HOA board called an emergency session to address the fallout. Karen showed up, uninvited, demanding they clear her name and reinstate her rank. She wore a new badge, laminated and twice as shiny, with the title Senior Enforcement Coordinator. The board wasn't amused. One of the younger members tried to explain, gently, that they could be facing legal exposure if they were seen to endorse what she'd done. Karen scoffed and pulled out a printed email allegedly from a federal source that supported her actions. The email was clearly fake, sent from an address ending in .gov and signed, Agent Johnson, Homeland Securities. I watched from across the street as she stormed out of the building, red-faced, muttering about conspiracies and legal injustice. It would have been funny if it weren't so ridiculous, but it was far from over. Karen wasn't just embarrassed. She was humiliated, and worse, she was plotting something. You could see it in her eyes. And so could the agent. Before leaving, Daniels pulled me aside and said quietly, "Keep your cameras rolling. This isn't over. She's got the kind of ego that doesn't go down quietly." I nodded. I'll be ready. Because what Karen didn't know was that this property wasn't just protected. It was bait. A real operational test site with layers of surveillance designed to capture everything. The moment she stepped foot inside, we had her on tape, on record, and under investigation. She'd walked into a federal trap, not because she was clever, but because she was clueless enough to think the law didn't apply to her. She thought she was defending the neighborhood. What she'd really done was declare war on the wrong property. And I was just getting started. If Karen had taken the federal warning as a cue to retreat, this story might have ended there. Maybe she'd lie low, claim temporary insanity, or vanish to one of those HOA retreats where former board members cry over landscaping ordinances. But no. Karen doubled down. She came back swinging like she hadn't just led a glitter-vested militia into a classified federal training site. And when Karen retaliated, she didn't use logic or remorse, she used paperwork. Aggressive, relentless, borderline nonsensical paperwork. The first wave hit my mailbox 2 days later. A thick, stapled packet labeled, "Violation Notices, Urgent Action Required." According to the HOA's latest review, I had committed over a dozen offenses including unapproved fencing, unsanctioned exterior modifications, improper driveway slope, suspicious shed activities, and, most insultingly, excessive use of tactical camouflage netting. They even claimed my training facility, authorized and co-owned by the federal government, was an unpermitted structure intended for non-residential use. I laughed when I read it, but not for long. Because the second wave hit my inbox. Karen had drafted a neighborhood-wide email titled "Danger in Our Midst," the truth about Lot 17. It was part exposé, part manifesto, and all caps. She accused me of harboring dangerous materials, intimidating HOA members, and using my connections to manipulate federal agents. She described the breach as a misunderstanding, and referred to herself as a brave civilian caught in the line of bureaucratic fire. She attached grainy photos taken from across the street showing agents in tactical gear and claimed I was transforming the neighborhood into a militarized zone disguised as suburban bliss. She didn't stop there. Karen submitted a request to the HOA board to revoke my membership entirely. Her reasoning? Failure to uphold community standards and creating a culture of fear. She cited the presence of armored vehicles, used once during a high-stakes hostage simulation last year, and the unfriendly attitude of my German shepherds, who had been trained by professionals and frankly had better manners than most people on the block. Her motion failed, of course, but that didn't stop her from plastering the community bulletin board with homemade posters reading, "This is not a drill. Say no to paramilitary neighbors." Still, I stayed quiet. Let her run her course, I figured. But the final straw came when she tried to have me banned from attending the next HOA meeting. She posted a revised guest list with my name conspicuously missing, citing ongoing investigations. I showed up anyway. I brought snacks. Karen tried to block me at the door like she was guarding a royal wedding. "This is a closed session," she hissed. "You are under review." I calmly showed her the HOA charter, which I kept in a neat binder, and pointed to the clause guaranteeing attendance to all dues-paying members. Then I handed her a chocolate chip cookie and walked right in. She was still standing there blinking when I took my seat and greeted the board with a cheerful, "Evening, everyone. Lovely weather for constitutional rights." The meeting was chaos. Karen had brought her supporters, most of whom looked like they regretted it the second things turned into a circus. She gave a 10-minute speech on restoring safety, followed by a slideshow presentation with dramatic music. The title slide read, "From Neighbor to Nuisance, the Militarization of Lot 17. She clicked through blurry photos, out-of-context quotes, and what I'm pretty sure was a screenshot from a video game labeled Potential Weapon Cache. I let her finish. Then I stood up, thanked her for her creative efforts, and calmly presented official documents from the FBI, confirming the legality and designation of my property. I explained, again, that the facility had been approved for training exercises and was under federal jurisdiction. I even offered to host a Q&A session for the community, strictly off the record, to help them understand what went on behind the scenes. Karen tried to shout over me, but the board finally told her to sit down. One member muttered, "This isn't a Netflix drama, Karen." The next week, the FBI decided to help out in a way Karen never saw coming. They coordinated with local law enforcement and invited the neighborhood to a community barbecue, hosted on my property. It was part of a new outreach initiative meant to improve transparency, build trust, and educate residents on the role of tactical training. Naturally, I said yes. Karen, on the other hand, declared it a deep state propaganda stunt and vowed to organize a protest. She didn't realize that showing up to protest a federal barbecue on private land with invited guests wasn't just a bad look, it was borderline harassment. The event went brilliantly. Dozens of families showed up. Kids got to sit in the empty tactical trucks, play with obstacle course gear, and meet some very chill federal agents who could disassemble a rifle while telling dad jokes. Karen, true to form, arrived in full regalia with her patrol in tow. This time, they wore matching t-shirts that read, "Protect the Peace, HOA Strong." They carried signs with slogans like, "Hot Dogs, Cold Lies," and "Training Today, Tyranny Tomorrow." At one point, Karen tried to confront the head catering agent, accusing him of serving the agenda. He blinked twice, handed her a rib plate, and said, "Ma'am, I'm literally just here to grill." But the real game-changer came from the surveillance footage. During a quiet moment, Daniels pulled me aside and let me know the legal team had finished reviewing the tapes from the day of the breach. It was worse than they initially thought. Karen hadn't just suggested the raid, she had actively planned it, instructed others on how to enter, and threatened any member who refused with removal from the patrol and neighborhood disgrace. Even worse, she had forged signatures on her patrol charter to make it look like she had unanimous board support. They now had grounds to investigate her for coercion, impersonation, and falsifying legal documents. And one of her own patrol members, the guy with the broom-turned-rifle, had confessed that he was manipulated and honestly thought it was just a game. I watched Karen from across the barbecue as she stood behind her little protest table, arms crossed, face twitching with suppressed rage. She didn't know what was coming. Not yet. She thought this was still some kind of turf war between neighbors. But she had crossed a line most people never even see. Because the law doesn't care how many signs you carry or titles you print. It cares about actions, evidence, and intent. And Karen had just handed them everything. The storm was coming. She just didn't know she was standing in the eye of it. It started with a knock at Karen's door. Just a regular Tuesday morning, sunny skies, birds chirping, and a federal subpoena being hand-delivered by a man in a dark suit who wasn't in the mood for questions. Karen answered in her satin robe, clutching a cup of herbal tea and blinking like someone who still thought this whole thing was just a neighborhood misunderstanding. The man handed her the envelope and simply said, "You'll want to read that thoroughly. You're due in court next week." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her on the doorstep, mouth open, eyes squinting at the official Department of Justice seal like it was a prank sticker. But it wasn't a prank. It was real. Karen had officially been indicted on several federal charges, including trespassing on restricted government property, obstruction of a federal operation, falsifying public records, and coercion of civilians into illegal activity. The prosecutors had everything: videos, audio recordings, witness statements, and the cherry on top, Bob's full affidavit confirming her entire plan. Bob, the retired ATF agent, had spent years dealing with dangerous people, but even he admitted he'd never seen someone go from community meeting to criminal indictment quite this fast. Karen went into full meltdown mode. First, she called an emergency HOA meeting to clear the air. Only 2 people showed up, and one of them was just there to deliver a pizza. She then tried to rally her remaining supporters, claiming it was a federal smear campaign meant to silence community leaders. Her rant was captured on someone's Ring doorbell and went viral online, racking up over 1 million views under the title, "HOA Lady Declares War on FBI, Cites Landscaping Rights." Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood was trying to move on. The board voted to officially disband the Community Response Patrol, effective immediately. They stripped Karen of all titles, privileges, and access to the community center where she used to hold her drills. The new acting HOA president, a soft-spoken librarian named Greg, issued a statement that simply read, "We are deeply sorry. We will never form a neighborhood militia again." But Karen wasn't done. No, she decided she would represent herself in court. Against the advice of literally every human being who had ever studied law, she walked into federal court wearing a pantsuit 3 sizes too big, a briefcase stuffed with HOA newsletters, and the kind of overconfidence usually reserved for game show contestants. She began her defense by claiming that as commander of the community, she had jurisdictional immunity. The judge asked her to clarify. She responded by trying to hand him a laminated HOA badge. He stared at her for 5 full seconds before sighing and saying, "This is a federal court, not a garage sale." Her defense was a disaster. She argued that my property was not clearly marked as a federal training facility, even though there were multiple signs, fences, and legal documents to the contrary. She then claimed that I had been intimidating residents by owning too many boots. Yes, boots. She cited the number of tactical boots visible in my garage as evidence of intent to instill fear. When asked if she had any legal background, Karen responded that she once watched 23 episodes of a courtroom drama and had taken a civics class in high school. It didn't help that she tried to cross-examine an FBI agent by asking if he'd ever mowed a lawn. No one knew where she was going with it. She had diagrams. She had hand-drawn maps of the neighborhood with little stick figures representing potential threats. One looked suspiciously like my dog in a hat. When the prosecution played footage of the breach, complete with Karen shouting, "Go, go, go," and pointing at my surveillance camera like she was storming Normandy, the courtroom went silent. Then someone in the back laughed. The judge didn't even bother calling for order. He just looked at Karen and said, "Ma'am, you're making their case for them." After 3 days of what could only be described as performative delusion, the court recessed and prepared for sentencing. Karen still believed she'd walk free. She told reporters outside the courthouse that she was confident justice would prevail, and accused the FBI of targeting local leaders to distract from real issues like untrimmed hedges and loud music at barbecues. She seemed oblivious to the fact that the prosecutor had already filed for enhanced sentencing based on the security risks her actions caused. Back at the neighborhood, things were shifting. Without Karen's chaos, life actually got pleasant. People started talking to each other again. Kids rode bikes without being followed by clipboard-carrying patrol members. The HOA meetings stopped sounding like war councils and more like potluck planning sessions. I finally got around to fixing the front door, but instead of the usual slab of reinforced wood, I installed a titanium core model etched with a message. "This property is protected under federal law. Entry without clearance will result in prosecution. Snacks available on request." Greg, the new HOA president, approached me one evening with a plate of cookies and an apology letter signed by the entire board. I told him I appreciated it, but didn't hold a grudge. The truth was, I never blamed the HOA, just the chaos Karen brought with her. Greg nodded, then admitted he'd joined the board originally to get someone to fix a broken bench at the park. Now he was managing damage control on a national embarrassment. He said the FBI had even sent a polite but firm request that no future neighborhood groups attempt paramilitary operations without first consulting actual authorities. The final hearing arrived on a gray Thursday. Karen entered the courtroom with less swagger, fewer buttons on her blazer, and a noticeably smaller briefcase. This time, she had a public defender, Assigned, not chosen, and she didn't say much. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she stood, cleared her throat, and said, "I only wanted to make the neighborhood safe." The judge responded, "You nearly caused an armed response from federal agents. You are lucky no one was hurt. That's not community leadership. That's reckless endangerment." She was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest, 1 year probation, and mandatory community service, which, ironically, included attending neighborhood safety courses taught by the same agents she had once tried to arrest with a Nerf gun. She was also banned from holding any HOA leadership position for 10 years. The courtroom buzzed with disbelief, but not because the punishment was harsh. It was because Karen still didn't seem to understand what she had done. As she was escorted out, she looked around and said, "I'll be back." The bailiff sighed and replied, "Please don't." And just like that, the woman who tried to lead a suburban insurrection was finally out of power. The door she'd kicked down was long repaired. The paranoia she'd stirred up had settled. But the lesson? That stuck around. Because the moment you start thinking your fake badge outranks the real ones, you're no longer defending your community. You're endangering it. 3 weeks after Karen's sentencing, things had settled into something eerily close to normal. The neighborhood was quiet, calm, and, for the first time in recent memory, free of laminated flyers warning about non-existent threats. The sun came up, the garbage got collected, and no one screamed about invisible cartels or surveillance drones disguised as ceiling fans. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Karen might have been confined to her house and stripped of her title, but what she'd done deserved more than just court-mandated community service. She'd weaponized paranoia, turned civilians into pawns, and put real lives at risk, all in the name of power she was never meant to have. She had kicked down my door. So I decided to return the favor. Only this time, I'd do it legally, publicly, and with a touch of poetic justice. It started with an idea. The FBI had been so amused by the fallout from Karen's crusade that they reached out about an initiative. They wanted to partner on a new community outreach program, one that taught local leaders, HOAs, and even curious civilians the basics of jurisdiction, civil responsibility, and federal boundaries. A crash course in what not to do when you suspect your neighbor of espionage. The working title was Lines Not to Cross: Understanding Federal Property and Common Sense. I offered up my training facility as the venue. The agents agreed. And then, with a little coordination, we made sure the first case study would be based on a very familiar incident. We sent out formal invitations to HOA leaders across the state. Dozens RSVP'd. Even some local government folks expressed interest. When the event rolled around, my property transformed from a tactical training ground into a polished lecture space, complete with coffee stations, folding chairs, and a massive projection screen set up just outside the main building. The guests arrived in droves, some skeptical, some curious, all intrigued by the whisper that a real federal case would be presented. And I didn't disappoint. The keynote speaker was Daniels, who opened with a calm, deadpan delivery. What happens when authority is imagined, credentials are self-issued, and common sense takes a vacation? Welcome to Exhibit A. Then the screen lit up with the footage. Karen's raid, captured in glorious HD from every angle. Her shouting. Her commands. Her fake radio codes. The clipboard. The broom rifle. The stunned look on her face when she realized she was surrounded by actual federal agents with actual weapons. The room was dead silent until one of the clips showed her trying to declare citizens' arrest on my coffee maker. At that point, someone in the back snorted, and the entire place erupted in laughter. I stood at the edge of the crowd, sipping from a styrofoam cup, watching it all unfold. No one knew the woman in the video was just a few houses down, pacing behind closed blinds under house arrest. No one knew she had petitioned the court 3 separate times to prevent this footage from being shown in public forums and been denied each time. She had tried to claim it was defamation. The judge reminded her, on record, that the truth isn't defamation. After the session, people came up to shake hands, ask questions, and request copies of the case study. One HOA president asked if they could show the video at their next board meeting to weed out the next Karen before she grows. Another asked if we'd ever consider turning it into a public safety PSA. The agents laughed but didn't say no. In the weeks that followed, the footage was clipped, cleaned, and uploaded as part of an official FBI community engagement series. It went viral again. Headlines read, "When HOA Goes Rogue, The Karen Case and How Not to Enforce the Rules." Memes popped up. My favorite was a photo of Karen's vest with the caption, "Commander of Bad Decisions." She became the unwilling face of suburban overreach, and while I didn't enjoy her public humiliation, I did take comfort in knowing that her actions would now serve as a warning, not a repeatable blueprint. But the final move, the one that sealed everything, came when the new HOA board restructured the entire community charter. With legal guidance, they added a clause that required any enforcement action to be reviewed and approved through a proper chain of authority, including law enforcement if necessary. They called it the Karen Clause. It was added unanimously. I didn't attend the vote. I didn't need to. I was already working on something more symbolic. The front door Karen had kicked in all those weeks ago had been replaced with a sleek, reinforced titanium model, courtesy of the agency. But I added one personal touch. A custom engraving right in the center, just under the peephole, that read, "This property is used for federal training. Enter without permission and meet the team." Below it, smaller, "Snacks available on request." It became a bit of a neighborhood joke. Even kids pointed it out during trick-or-treating, laughing nervously before asking if the FBI was really inside. Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I let the dogs answer. Karen, confined to her house, had to watch it all unfold. She could see the comings and goings, the increased respect from the community, the way people stopped treating my place like a mystery bunker and started seeing it for what it was, a legitimate, secured training site serving a real purpose. She didn't speak to anyone. No more newsletters. No more flyers. No more patrols. Her laminated badges collected dust in the garage. One afternoon, I passed by her house while walking my dogs. She was standing behind the screen door, arms crossed, eyes locked on the sidewalk like she wanted to burn a hole through it. I gave her a polite nod. She didn't respond. Just stood there, silent, small, and very much unarmed. That was the thing about Karen. Her power had always been pretend. The moment it was challenged with something real, it crumbled like stale crackers. In the end, she was just another person who let ego outweigh reason, who confused authority with entitlement. And while she wasn't in prison, she was something arguably worse to her: irrelevant, forgotten. A cautionary tale dressed in tactical khakis. Me? I went back to work. The drills continued. The agents came and went. The community finally breathed again. And every time I locked my new front door, I smiled, knowing that for all her threats, all her noise, all her glittery delusions of command, Karen had never really kicked in my door. She just opened it for everyone to see what real authority looks like.